At 2:13 in the morning, I heard a sound that did not belong in a neighborhood like ours. It was not a siren. It was not a dog. It was not the usual late-night bass from somebody's car, rolling too slow down Maple Glen Drive. It was a woman, crying like her chest had been split open. Not the kind of crying people do when they want attention. Not the kind that comes with anger. I mean the kind that sounds like somebody has run out of places to hide their pain. I sat up so fast I almost scared myself. My youngest son, Malik, was asleep on the air mattress beside my bed because the AC in his room had died again, and in July heat in Georgia, that was basically child abuse. I held my breath and listened. There it was again. A sharp, broken sob, then silence. Then another one, lower this time, like whoever it was had buried her face in a pillow. I slid my feet onto the floor and moved to the window. From the second floor of our old duplex, I could see most of the cul-de-sac if I leaned past the busted blind slats. The streetlights threw that pale orange glow over everything, and across from us, at the biggest house on the block, I saw one upstairs light still on. That house belonged to Monique Harlow. And if you had asked me the day before whether Monique Harlow had a single reason to cry, I probably would have laughed in your face. Because from where I stood, Monique had the kind of life women like me only ever saw while washing dishes and daydreaming. My name is Keisha Walker, and for almost 3 years I had been quietly comparing my life to hers. Not in a healthy way either. I mean in that ugly, silent, soul-shrinking way that makes you smile at somebody in daylight and resent them in private. Monique lived in a 5-bedroom brick house with white columns, flower beds that looked fresh every season, and one of those black SUVs so clean they reflected the sky. Her daughter went to a private school with little plaid uniforms. Her son had his own basketball trainer. She wore fitted coats in winter, linen sets in summer, gold hoops that looked expensive even from across the street, and a smile so calm it irritated me. Meanwhile, I was 34 years old, sharing a duplex with creaking floors, peeling paint, and a landlord who acted like every repair request was a personal attack. My husband Andre drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. I braided hair from home and picked up cleaning shifts whenever somebody canceled on their regular girl. Some months we were okay. Some months we played that game where you paid the light bill late so the water bill could live another week. So yes, I looked at Monique. I looked at the SUV. I looked at the house. I looked at the polished version of her stepping out every Sunday, with those soft neutral colors and that impossible posture, like life had never once caught her off guard. And I let myself believe she had been chosen for ease, while the rest of us had been assigned survival. It got bad enough that my bitterness started leaking into my motherhood. One afternoon, Malik came home upset because another boy laughed at his sneakers. Not because they were dirty, because the sole had started to separate near the front, and when he walked too fast, it flapped a little. He tried to joke about it, but I could see he was embarrassed. He asked me why we never had nice things, like the people across the street. He did not say Monique's name, but he didn't have to. And instead of correcting him, instead of teaching him gratitude or dignity or anything wise and decent, I fed the poison. I said, "Some people just get lucky, baby." I will never forget that sentence for the rest of my life. Because luck had nothing to do with what was happening in that house. I did not know that yet, of course. All I knew that night was that the woman in the big house was crying, like somebody who had been trying not to cry for a very long time. The next morning, Monique came out at 8:06 exactly, like she usually did. Cream blouse, dark sunglasses, hair slicked back into a low bun. Her daughter, Nia, followed behind her, thin little braids swinging against a pale pink backpack. Her son, Jordan, climbed into the back seat with headphones on, barely looking up. Monique smiled at the crossing guard, waved at old Mrs. Dennison from 2 doors down, got in her SUV, and drove off like nobody had been up breaking apart a few hours earlier. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. Maybe the crying came from another house. Maybe it had been TV noise. Maybe fatigue had turned a catfight into a tragedy in my head. But then the next night came, and the next. Not every night, just enough to make it impossible to ignore. Always after midnight, always from the Harlow house. Sometimes it was sobbing, sometimes prayer, sometimes a voice so cracked and desperate I could only catch pieces. Please, not again. God, please. I told Andre about it one morning while he was tying his boots in the kitchen. He barely looked up. People got stuff going on, he said. Don't go borrowing nobody else's burden unless they ask you to. That should have been the end of it. But something in me had shifted. At first, I was curious, then suspicious, then ashamed of how curious I was. Because if I am being honest, a part of me wanted her perfect life to be fake. I wanted proof that the universe still made sense. That if I was struggling this hard, at least the people who looked blessed were paying some hidden fee I just couldn't see. That is the nasty truth nobody says out loud. Sometimes we do not just want relief for ourselves. Sometimes we want evidence that nobody else escaped pain either. A week later, I got my answer. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, too hot for April, the kind of heat that makes everything feel impatient. I had just finished a sew-in for a client and was carrying trash out when I saw Monique in her driveway. Not the polished Monique, not the Sunday Monique, not the Monique with lipstick and posture and that soft, unreachable smile. This Monique was leaning against the SUV in gray sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. No makeup, no earrings. Her face looked hollow. Not old exactly, just tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. She was holding a pharmacy bag, then another one. Then she opened the back of the SUV and I saw boxes, gloves, wipes, a folded wheelchair. My chest tightened. At that same moment, she noticed me. For 1 second, we just looked at each other, and I saw it happen. That automatic mask people put on when they don't want the world asking questions. She straightened her shoulders, gave me a small smile, and said, "Hey, Keisha," like nothing in the world was wrong. I muttered "hey" back and turned away, but my hands were shaking. That night, the crying came earlier than usual, around 11:40. Then voices. Then a child coughing. That sound went through me like cold water. The next day, I made a reason to be outside around noon. I swept the front steps twice, wiped down a railing that did not need wiping, pretended to reorganize potted plants we didn't even care about. And eventually, I saw Mrs. Dennison from down the block making her slow little walk with her cane. She nodded toward Monique's house and whispered, "You know something's wrong over there." I tried to act casual. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice like the azaleas might be listening. "I saw them leaving before sunrise last week. Little girl looked weak, real weak. And then yesterday, home health pulled up." That was all she knew, but it was enough. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I walked across the street and rang Monique's bell. I almost turned around twice before she opened the door. When she did, she looked surprised enough that I knew I had never once made myself feel safe to her. That hit me harder than I expected. Because envy always imagines itself invisible. But people can feel when you resent them. They may not say it. They may still wave. But they feel it. Monique stood there, with one hand on the door and the other gripping the frame, like she was tired. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I answered. "I know this might be out of line, and if it is, I'm sorry, but are you okay?" There are moments in life when people hear a simple question and realize they do not have the strength to keep lying. That was one of those moments. Her face changed right in front of me. Not dramatically, not like in movies. It was quieter than that. Like somebody loosened a knot and everything underneath it started slipping free. She looked over her shoulder, then back at me, and asked, "Can you come in for a minute?" I stepped into that house for the first time and felt ashamed before I even made it past the entry table. Because yes, it was beautiful. The hardwood floors gleamed. The staircase curved like something out of a magazine. The living room smelled like expensive candles and lemon polish. But underneath all that was another smell. Rubbing alcohol. Medicine. That clean, sterile scent of a place fighting something it may not be winning against. On the coffee table were receipts from children's hospitals, insurance statements, pill organizers, and a notebook filled with times, doses, temperatures, side effects. The house I had envied was not a palace. It was a command center. A war room. A place built around keeping one little girl alive. Monique led me into the den, and that is where I saw Nia. Curled up on the couch under a blanket with cartoons playing low. She looked smaller than usual, and not just because she was sitting down. Her cheeks had lost that roundness healthy kids carry without trying. Her skin looked too pale. Her eyes were heavy. On the side table sat a basin, ginger chews, meds, a thermometer, and a little pink journal. My throat closed. Monique sat down slowly and pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "She has leukemia," she said. No build-up, no speech, just that. And because there are some sentences that split time into before and after, the room felt different the second the words landed. I did not know what to say, so I said the truth. "Oh my God." Monique nodded without looking at me. "She was in remission for almost a year," she whispered. "Then, in January, her numbers changed." Her voice cracked on the last word. I sat down across from her, every ugly thought I had ever had about her life lining up in my memory like witnesses against me. She told me the rest in pieces. The house had been bought before Nia got sick, back when her husband Darius was still doing well in commercial real estate, and Monique was running an event business full-time. The car? Before the relapse. The school? They were trying to keep at least one part of Nia's world normal for as long as they could. But now, the business had stalled. Darius was taking contracts out of state because the insurance alone was swallowing them alive. Her jewelry was being sold one piece at a time. The perfect life people admired from the sidewalk was held together by autopay, prayer, and panic. And the crying I heard at night? That was Monique. Sometimes in the laundry room, sometimes in the shower, sometimes in the garage with the engine off and her face in her hands. Because Nia was old enough to read fear, and Monique refused to let her daughter watch her mother fall apart. I felt like the floor should have opened up and swallowed me, because while I was standing in my kitchen envying her landscaping, She was memorizing blood counts. While I was resenting her outfits, she was learning how to smile through pediatric oncology consultations. While I was saying she got lucky, she was begging God not to bury her child. At one point, Monique laughed this small, broken laugh and said, "The craziest part? Women always tell me I look so put together." That sentence did something to me, because I knew exactly how often I had been one of those women. I told her I was sorry. Then I told her the real sorry, the uncomfortable one. I said, "I have envied you for a long time." She looked at me, not shocked, just tired. Then she said something I still carry with me. "I know." She did not say it cruelly. That almost made it worse. She just said it like a woman who had felt the distance and the judgment, but never had the energy to confront it. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, embarrassed tears. I told her about Malik's shoes, about the comments I had made in my own house, about how easy it had been to turn another woman into a symbol instead of a person. Monique listened. Then she reached for a tissue box and handed it to me. Imagine that. The woman I had resented was comforting me in her own house while her child slept 10 feet away, fighting a disease my family had never had to face. Before I left that day, she asked me a question. "Would you mind," she said slowly, "if I called you sometimes?" "For what?" "For nights when Darius is gone, and I just need another grown person in the room. There are invitations that expose your character." That was one of them. Because what she was asking for was not money, not advice, not a fundraiser, not social media sympathy. Just presence. Just another human being who knew the truth and would not make her perform strength every second of the day. I said yes. The first night she called, it was 1:07 a.m. I remember because I was already awake, listening for the phone without admitting that was what I was doing. When I got there, Nia had a fever and had thrown up twice. Monique was calm in that eerie way people get when panic has become routine. She moved with speed, checked temps, switched cloths, logged numbers, called a nurse line, and kept her voice gentle the whole time. But her hands shook whenever she thought I wasn't looking. That night, I wiped down countertops, heated broth nobody ate, sat beside Nia while Monique showered, and folded laundry at 2 in the morning in a house I had once hated. And everything changed. After that, I started going over whenever Darius traveled or treatment weeks got rough. Some nights Nia felt almost normal and wanted to braid my fingers into grandma styles because she said I did hair and should prove it. Some nights she slept for hours while Monique stared at the baby monitor they used, even though Nia was too old for one, just because it let her hear every change in breathing. Some nights Monique talked about insurance denials, about chemo schedules, about pretending to be fine at church because she could not survive one more person saying, "God won't put more on you than you can bear." About how lonely it is when people assume money protects you from tragedy. And some nights, she did not talk at all. She just sat on the kitchen floor with a mug of tea gone cold and let herself be tired in front of someone. That became our rhythm. I would cross the street after the block got quiet. The porch light would already be on. Sometimes I brought soup, sometimes peppermint oil, sometimes just myself. And slowly, as humiliating as it is to admit, I started seeing my own life differently too. Not because our bills vanished, not because struggle became romantic, but because perspective entered the room. I still had overdue notices. I still had a busted dryer and a son outgrowing shoes too fast. But I also had healthy children. I had ordinary mornings. I had the luxury of not memorizing oncology language. That realization did not make me grateful in a fake inspirational quote kind of way. It made me softer, more honest, less arrogant about what I thought I understood from the outside. One Sunday, everything nearly fell apart. Monique came to church looking beautiful, as always. Soft blue dress, gold-crossed necklace. Makeup laid just enough to hide exhaustion from people who wanted to be fooled. Nia was not with her. Jordan sat on the end of the pew, unusually quiet. Halfway through service, Monique's phone lit up. She looked at it once and went still. Then she stood, apologized, and walked out so fast her purse fell off her shoulder. I followed her into the hallway without thinking. She answered the phone with that voice mothers use when they are trying not to frighten the world. By the time she hung up, her mouth had gone pale. "It's Nia," she said. "She collapsed." I drove. I do not even remember volunteering. I just had my keys out and we were moving. At the hospital, the next 4 hours felt like a lifetime poured into fluorescent lighting. Darius came straight from the airport. Jordan cried in a vending machine corner because he was old enough to know more than adults wanted him to know. Monique sat bent forward with both elbows on her knees, whispering the same prayer over and over until it no longer sounded like words. That was the first time I saw the wealthy husband, too. And let me tell you something. There is nothing glamorous about a man who looks like he would trade every material thing he owns for one sentence from a doctor. Darius was not arrogant. He was not detached. He was shattered. Whatever image I had built in my mind of their household as polished and privileged died in that waiting room. They were just a family with resources running out, courage thinning, and love refusing to quit. Nia stabilized that night. Not healed, not magically better, just stable enough to come home 2 days later. And when she did, our street changed. I do not know exactly how word got out. Maybe Jordan told a friend. Maybe Mrs. Dennison noticed too much. Maybe pain has a smell, and communities pick it up no matter how carefully you hide it. What I know is this. The story did not spread like gossip. It spread like concern. By that Friday, casseroles had appeared on porches. By Sunday, a prayer list had somehow formed. By the next week, people who had barely spoken to Monique beyond polite waves were sending gift cards, dropping off gas money, asking about school pickups, offering to sit with Jordan. And the part that moved me most was this. The help did not come mainly from the biggest houses. It came from everybody. The retired couple on fixed income, the single dad with twins, the college girl renting the basement suite, a woman who worked nights at the post office and still found time to leave a bag of homemade muffins with a note that said, "No need to answer the door, just thinking of you." That is when I finally understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Need does not always live where struggle looks obvious. And compassion cannot wait until pain becomes visually acceptable to us. There was one night, late in August, when Monique and I were sitting at her kitchen island after Nia had fallen asleep. Rain tapped the windows. The dishwasher hummed. Everything felt fragile, but briefly calm. Monique looked at me and said, "Do you know what hurt me the most before you knocked on my door?" I thought she was going to mention the hospital, the fear, the money. She shook her head. It was how invisible I felt in plain sight. I did not understand at first. She said, Everybody saw the house, the car, the clothes. People assumed I was the one person on this block who didn't need softness. So they admired me, but nobody checked on me. That line stayed with me because it exposed a kind of cruelty we rarely name. Sometimes people do not resent strong-looking women. Sometimes they exile them. They decide beauty means ease, money means protection, composure means lack of need. And then they leave those women to carry unbearable things alone, because their suffering doesn't match the picture other people prefer. A few weeks later, Monique did something that stunned me. She told her story publicly. Not online, not in some dramatic speech. At a women's event at church, after another lady gave testimony about debt and marriage and restoration, Monique raised her hand and asked if she could say something. When she walked to the front, every head turned. Because she was still Monique Harlow after all. Still graceful, still polished, still looking like someone whose life should have been introducing a skincare brand, not grief. She stood behind that podium for a full 5 seconds before speaking. Then she said, "I have spent the last year letting people compliment my strength while I was privately drowning." The room changed right then. You could feel it. No rustling, no fake amens, just attention. She did not overshare. She did not dramatize. She did not turn her daughter's illness into content. She simply told the truth. That her child was sick. That she had mistaken image for protection. That she had hidden because she thought dignity meant silence. And that one neighbor's knock on the door had reminded her that being seen can be its own miracle. I cried the whole time. So did Mrs. Dennison. So did half the room. Afterward, women lined up not to stare, not to pry, but to tell their own truths. One had a husband with early dementia. One was sleeping in makeup because she could not afford to let clients see stress on her face. One had lost a son and never said his name in church because people got awkward around grief. That night became less about Monique and more about how many women were dragging heavy things around while pretending they were handbags. And when I got home, Malik was at the table doing homework in his socks. I sat down across from him and apologized. Not in a vague mother way, a real apology. I told him I was wrong for teaching him to measure people's lives by what they show. I told him I had talked about money like it was proof of peace. I told him I had looked at another woman and turned her into a target for my own frustration. He listened, pencil in hand, trying to decide how serious this was. Then he said, "So the girl across the street is really sick?" I nodded. He was quiet for a second. Then he asked, "Can I give her my comic books?" That was the moment I realized children can return to decency faster than adults if we stop feeding them our damage. Nia loved those comics. For 2 weeks, she made Andre read them in different voices when he came by to fix a loose banister Darius had not had time to touch. Yes, even Andre got involved. Turns out the man who said not to borrow other people's burdens started mowing their lawn when Darius was away, and never once announced it to anybody. Because men love acting like they do not care, right up until compassion gives them a job. By fall, Nia had good days and terrible ones. There was no neat ending. No miracle blood panel that wrapped everything up for dramatic effect. Some mornings she laughed and asked for pancakes. Some afternoons, she was too weak to sit through a full movie. Some nights, Monique called me just to hear another adult voice say, "You're doing enough." And every time I crossed that street, I thought about the woman I used to be. The one behind cracked blinds. The one counting another woman's blessings like they had been stolen from her. The one who thought appearances told the story. I do not judge her entirely, because pain can make people petty before it makes them wise. But I am grateful I did not stay her. The hardest night came in November. Cold rain, wind against the windows, Andre asleep. My phone ringing at 12:48. When I answered, Monique was trying to stay calm, but I heard the terror underneath. Nia could not catch her breath. I ran across the street without even putting on proper shoes. Darius was away again, storm delays trapping him in Dallas. Jordan was in the hallway crying quietly, trying not to make things worse. And in that moment, all the expensive furniture in that big house meant absolutely nothing. Nothing. Because when a child cannot breathe, nobody cares about marble countertops. Nobody cares about school tuition. Nobody cares what car is in the garage. All that matters is air, time, hands, prayer, movement. The ambulance came fast, but not fast enough for a mother. I sat in the back with Monique and Nia while the medic worked, and Monique kept saying, "Stay with me, baby. Stay with me." Not screaming, not panicking, just speaking from some place so primal it made my own chest hurt. At the hospital, they got her stabilized again. Afterward, near dawn, Monique and I sat in a corridor with stale coffee and no energy left to pretend. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I used to think being admired meant I had made it." I turned and looked at her. She smiled this tired, broken little smile and said, "Now I think being loved honestly is worth more than any image I ever protected." That was it. That was the lesson. Not that money is evil. Not that beautiful things are fake. Not that everyone who looks put together is secretly miserable. No. The lesson was simpler and heavier than that. You cannot read a life from the curb. You cannot diagnose peace from a front yard. You cannot know what somebody cries about after midnight just because their daylight looks expensive. By Christmas, our block was different. Not perfect, still noisy, still full of people with bills and attitudes and mismatched trash cans. But different. People checked in more, waved longer, asked real questions. Monique smiled differently too. Still elegant, still beautiful, but less armored. And I changed in ways people probably could not see right away. I stopped narrating other people's lives in my head. Stopped using comparison as a survival hobby. Stopped letting lack turn me mean. When I looked at my own home, I still saw what needed fixing. But I also saw what had always been there. Warmth, noise, health, ordinary mercy. The kind you only learn to value after standing close to somebody else's nightmare. Months later, on one of Nia's better days, she sat on her front steps wrapped in a blanket and looked up at me while I was bringing over banana pudding. She said, "Miss Keisha?" I said, "Yeah, baby?" She asked, "Were you always our friend?" Kids will walk straight through your pride if you let them. I smiled and told her the truth. No, but I should have been. She nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Then she said, "Well, you are now." And somehow, in that simple sentence, there was grace for all of it. For my envy. For Monique's silence. For the distance between our houses. For the road I had crossed too late, but not too late to matter. So if you're listening to me right now, and there's somebody in your life whose blessings irritate you, Somebody whose glow makes you feel like God skipped your address. Before you harden your heart, remember this. Some people dress their pain beautifully. Some people smile because they are trying not to scare their children. Some people keep the porch clean while their world is collapsing in the back bedroom. And some of the people you envy the most would trade every visible thing they own for one ordinary, peaceful night. I used to think the richest woman on my street had everything. Now I know what she really needed was what money could not guarantee. A witness, a friend, a door knock, a place to put the fear down for 5 minutes. And ever since then, whenever I hear somebody talk too confidently about another person's easy life, I think about that sound at 2:13 in the morning. That sound of hidden grief breaking through the walls. That sound that forced me to become a better woman than the one I had been. So let me leave you with this. Have you ever envied someone, only to later realize they were carrying a pain you never would have survived in silence?